Yes, I know. I didn't know that either.
Took it. Here's a close second. Just stare. You just wait till she does. Poor little man is silly. Tripped over a truck because his shoes make a run mess. Tripped over his papers before he was fine. And he let me put that like this. It was enough where they put like his hat on. But you can take shots. Yeah. They were charging like $25 entry.
Give everybody about another minute or so to come in, and then we'll get started. Going?
I think so.
So we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing I wanted to do is just kind of, by show of hands, I wanted to do a quick poll. So how many of you have been homesteading for less than 5 years? Okay, I thought quite a few of you. Anyone 5 to 10? Anyone over 10 years? Okay, perfect. So basically what I'm going to be talking a little bit today is my journey, how I got started homesteading, and where I plan to take it and get everybody else involved with homesteading as well. So my name is Brittney Grumke, and kind of like I just said, I aim to use my passion for gardening and homesteading to grow a sense of community. So I was actually raised in the city. I grew up in Blue Springs, graduated from Blue Springs South in 2010, and I never really felt like I belonged anywhere. I hated being in the city. I hated being in closed, confined spaces, and my grandparents had a house out in the country. I spent a lot of my summers with them, and their neighbor actually raised cattle. And so from the time I was old enough to basically stumble down the hillside, I would sit at the edge of this pasture here and watch them just graze and be cows, and I was fascinated by it. And so along this fence is where I spent most of my summers growing up, and I was dreaming of being a veterinarian. Now, why I thought being a veterinarian was the only way to work with cattle is beyond me, but my 4-year-old brain said that's what I have to do. And so that's kind of what I set my heart on. Now, in high school, I joined the ag program because I thought that was a really good way of making connections to be able to get into vet school. So if anybody is familiar with Blue Springs, you will know that that's not really an agricultural area. So our freshman year, or my freshman year, was the first year my chapter ever even existed. So we were very small, we didn't have a whole lot of resources, but that was the one and only time in high school that I felt like I belonged. I felt like I was accepted, and I felt like there was people that were like me and wanted to be farming. I got made fun of a lot in high school because most of the people in Blue Springs, if you say you like hunting or you like fishing or you want to be on a farm, they look at you like you're crazy. Or at least back then they did. Maybe it's changed a little. So, no. Well, that's probably true. But that was my experience in high school. I got made fun of a lot. It didn't bother me a whole lot, maybe a little bit. As anybody gets made fun of, they don't like it. But I knew what I loved, I knew where I was going, and I didn't really need their opinions about it. So I joined the FFA, and one of my favorite projects in FFA was when our advisor helped us to build a greenhouse. And that was really the start of everything that I'm doing now, although I didn't know it at the time. But he got me interested in growing plants to sell. And so we grew a bunch of plants and we were selling them in the spring to raise money for our very small chapter. And I also worked with some veterinarians, spent my summers giving cattle injections, because again, that's the only way I could work with cows in my mind. And I just really enjoyed the ag program. I ended up being exposed to a different part of the agricultural industry than I had previously been. Being in Blue Springs, you don't see a lot of that. So that really kind of opened my eyes and got me started thinking about where I could take it. And so basically after high school, I was still in hot pursuit of a veterinary degree until about my second semester of college when I had to take chemistry. And that didn't go so well for me. But by this point, I went to Mizzou and I was in their College of Agriculture. So I was introduced to a lot of different areas of working with cattle, and I realized you don't have to be a vet to work with cattle, and you don't have to own cattle to work with cattle. And so I changed my major from pre-vet to livestock production. And I narrowed my focus down to dairy production and swine production. And so from there, I ended up graduating with a degree in livestock production, and I accepted a position as a farrowing manager on a very large breed-to-wean operation. Now this operation had approximately 7,200 sows in confinement. And again, I had a very one-sided view of agriculture at this point. I had no idea what homesteading was. I knew what I was taught in school. And so that was what I pursued, because I wanted to be a farmer, I wanted to be with livestock. And so as I'm working on this farm in confinement, I'm miserable. It wasn't what I pictured my career in farming to be. First of all, I pictured being outside, not inside. And I loved working with the pigs, which some of you, if you've worked with pigs, might roll your eyes at that. But I really did. I loved working in the farrowing barns and being with the pigs. I just hated being inside. So I ended up leaving that job because I knew it was not going to sustain me. Wasn't really where I wanted to spend my time. But after I left that, I ended up going into a completely different path, but I thought I was still using my agricultural degree. At least it wasn't going to waste. I went into the biotech world. Anybody familiar with biotech? So basically I was doing a lot of research studies on diabetic testing supplies and insulins, some cancer drugs as well. But I thought, well, okay, I'm going to use my science degree, and it won't just be 4 years wasted, and I'll be able to save for a farm. I started as an animal technician and worked my way up over the course of about 4 years to an associate scientist. And I was working about 50 to 60 hours a week at that point, removed from any sort of animal husbandry or hands-on animal work. And I was sitting behind a computer, and I hated it. I was miserable. And so I started to think, well, what am I going to do to change that? How am I going to start living my dream life? Before I get to that, though, I want to back up and explain some of what was going on during me seemingly fumbling through my 20s with my career. So when I was working on that hog farm, I met a lot of really interesting people, and they all grew up out in the country, and they all had a vegetable garden. And they would bring their produce in for lunch, and I thought, that's kind of cool, I'm going to give that a shot. So in 2014, I planted my first vegetable garden, and it failed massively. Turns out I knew absolutely nothing about what I was doing, but it sparked an obsession for me. And I don't have any pictures of that garden, but I do have a picture of the flower bed I put outside of my house. And it was nothing special. You can see it's not even how I would plant my flowers now. But that was the very first time I felt like I was doing something I was called to do. And so I started buying all of my produce from the local Amish community because, again, none of my produce produced. So I bought all of my produce from the Amish community in Clark, Missouri. I brought it home and I started canning and dehydrating and just learning as much as I can about food preservation. And so as I started to kind of go through that process of learning and teaching myself, I was doing a lot of internet research. And some of you might know a few of these people. Anybody recognize anyone on there? So that was when I was introduced to Joel Salatin and kind of how broken our food system is. And to be blunt, how everything I was taught in school is not at all what I want to do or believe in. And so I started going down the rabbit hole, as I'm sure most of you have, reading all the books. Amy Fuel, which I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's one of the first YouTubers I started watching. Her and Jessica and Dustin Rhodes. And at the time I started watching them, there was maybe 10 to 15 YouTubing channels even on homesteading at all. Of course, there's a lot more now, but they were not globally recognized like they are now. And they were really the first group of people that I thought were farming the way I want to farm. I'm not so crazy for wanting to do things differently than I had been taught in school. And of course, I didn't grow up out in the country, so what I was taught in school was all I knew until this point. And so I became pretty obsessed with the world of homesteading, and I started sharing everything that I was doing on my Facebook page. And keep in mind, growing up in the city, most of the friends on my Facebook page also grew up in the city, and I got a lot of questions like, why on earth would you put that much work into growing a garden when we have a price chopper down the street? They just didn't get it. But I didn't care. I've never been the in crowd, I've never been super popular, so I just kept sharing everything that I was doing. And it ended up sparking an idea for me on a business plan. I thought, okay, I don't really like my job. In fact, I really don't like my job. What can I do to not have to work this job anymore? So I filled about 30 to 40 notebooks full of ideas for this business. Products I was gonna sell. I'm sure most of you have these notebooks full of ideas as well. Ways to pay for my homestead. And I had a logo design. This is actually not my logo anymore, but that was the first logo I had. And I just started mapping out everything that I was gonna do. Well, fast forward to 2020, I had my son, and as any parent knows, when you have your first child, your priorities shift pretty quickly. And at this point, I was actually working a job as a mortgage lender because I wanted to make a little bit more money than I was making as a scientist to pay for my future farm, right? Well, I was already working from home, and we all know what happened in 2020. So my life didn't really change because I was already working from home. I had a pantry full of home preserved food, and I had a stockpile of stuff because that's what homesteaders do. We keep everything on hand. So I didn't really see the changes that a lot of people did. But in 2020, there started to become this local movement towards we gotta know how to sustain ourselves. We have to be able to grow our food. We wanna know how to do that. So people started rushing to YouTube and Facebook. I'm sure some of you are a result of that as well. But everybody was so craving the knowledge that I had spent the last 5 or 6 years obsessing over. And I was noticing it. And I was so frustrated with my job. As you can see in this picture here, I'm on a meeting with clients with my son in my lap. And that was the norm for me, 60 hours a week. I would be feeding him, changing him, whatever he needed, while talking to clients, while on Zoom calls. And it was just exhausting and frustrating. And I knew that something had to change. I knew that there had to be something a little bit more to life than sitting at a desk.
That's right.
So in October of 2014, I decided I'm gonna go ahead and form this business. I'm gonna start working towards my dream of being at home with my son, working for myself, providing for myself. So I hired a digital designer. We had the logo created. I started an online garden club, and I started my first annual CSA program. Anybody know what a CSA program is?
No.
Okay. So it's basically like a subscription box to the farm. You pay in advance, and for however long your program is, mine is 10 weeks, you get to come to the farm and pick up your produce that you purchased. It's a way of helping the farmer because you pay up front, so it helps us pay for our inputs. And then you get rewarded on the back end. So I started that in 2020 was when I started advertising for my first CSA, which would run in 2021. And about this time, I'm noticing this massive growth in the online homesteading world, which when I first started homesteading, there wasn't an online homesteading world like there is now. There was 10 or 15 channels on YouTube maybe, but now there's hundreds and thousands. And those first few channels that kind of introduced me to the world of homesteading, they are now some of the most commonly known household names in the homesteading community. If you're familiar at all with Amy Fuel, she created Homesteaders of America. Every fall they host the largest homesteading convention in the country in Virginia. And then Justin Rhodes, he created Abundance Plus. Does anybody have an Abundance Plus membership or know what it is? Okay, so Abundance Plus is a streaming platform created by homesteaders, and it's catered for homesteaders. Everything that is on that streaming platform is farming, homesteading, food preservation, self-reliant related. So definitely check that out. It's an amazing resource.
Tell me again.
It's called Abundance Plus.
Okay.
So it's an incredible resource for you as you're getting started. So much knowledge on there. And then Jessica Sowards of Roots and Refuge Farm. She's really the one who got me inspired with the gardening. And she is now one of the most famous homesteaders with globally recognized branding. All of them have gone on to write their own homesteading books. And Jessica actually opened this year a homesteading mercantile in South Carolina called the Carolina Homestead Exchange. You can find her on her website as well. She is a treasure trove of knowledge. But I'm noticing all of this growth in the online homesteading world, and I'm like, okay, finally, what I've been doing is not so crazy. Everybody kind of thinks this is good. And so I wanted to kind of expand on everything that I was doing. I didn't mention this earlier, but in my first year of doing a CSA program, I lived in a neighborhood in Green Valley. So I did all of my CSA program out of my backyard with raised beds. And it worked for 6 people of my CSA, but if I was gonna expand past that, I needed a lot more space. And so in 2022, I got the opportunity to move. And I moved out to a little farmhouse in Odessa. And this is the farmhouse here. And this was my garden in this house when I first started. And when I moved out there, I got really interested in rotational grazing because I saw that my landlord was rotating his cattle and he was implementing some regenerative agriculture practices. And so I started reading this book. And this is actually a picture of that book. And it is called Growing a Revolution by David Montgomery. If you're interested at all in regenerative agriculture or pasture rotation, I definitely recommend that book. But I read that book and I filled a notebook full of questions because I was going to ask my landlord to basically allow me to pick his brain. I was like, you're doing this, what I'm reading. I want to know what you're doing, why you're doing it. Well, that request to pick his brain actually ended up turning into him asking me to dinner, and he is now my husband. He's in the back. So it worked out pretty well for us. But I basically just picked his brain for a couple of hours on what I was reading, and he probably was like, who is this city girl that moved into my house and wants to know what I'm doing? But it worked out really well, and I learned a lot. And so it seems like everything is going really well for me. My brand is growing. My gardening efforts are growing. I have this great house out in the country. My son, right here, gets to explore and be a, at that time, 3-year-old little boy. And so I was really happy. Everything was kind of trending in the right direction. And does anybody know what usually happens when things are going really, really good? Yeah. I got a call on a Monday morning that effective immediately for no reason other than they decided to cancel the department I was in. I lost my job. And so at that point, my business was making some money, but not enough to pay rent. I just started dating the landlord, so I didn't think that was going to work out very well. So I did what any parent would do, and I took the first office job that came my way. And you can ask my husband how miserable I was. I think I lasted 6 weeks at that job, and there was a lot of praying and a lot of conversation back and forth with family members, and he was my boyfriend at the time, but my husband, on what do I do? I feel like I'm being called to do this, but my bank account is saying you need to do this. And I took a pretty big leap of faith, and I quit that job without anything lined up.
Yay.
And it worked out. But I quit that job, and I became 100% reliant on myself. You know, you can lose your job at any time, and I thought, I can count on myself. I can't count on anybody else. So I did that, and 1 year after losing my job and feeling like I had no idea what was gonna happen, I married my husband, and we moved into our forever home. And that was really when things started to be like, okay, I'm back on my own 2 feet, my business is doing well, and so I started preparing to run my own CSA, and we brought our son home from daycare. Didn't have to rely on them anymore, which was wonderful. I love having him home with me. And I started thinking of what next. And so I told you at the very beginning, I plan on using my passion for gardening and homesteading to grow a sense of community. And that's exactly what I want to do. So I have my CSA program, and this year I expanded into cut flowers. We're actually opening a farm store on our property as well. My husband bought me a high tunnel that we're gonna build this fall and add that in as well. And at some point, time and money allowing, we'll have a window greenhouse or a glass greenhouse of some form to start my seeds in so that they can get out of the living room. But that's kind of where I'm going with my personal end of things. But how I'm going to build community with this. You guys are a big part of that. So I want to reach out to my community as much as possible. I do that on Facebook. I do that by coming to things like this. And I want to have people come out to our farm as well, see how I'm growing the vegetables. If you want to learn how to garden, I'd love to teach you. I want to expand the CSA, and at some point, I would love to offer internship experiences or work experiences. Also, collaborations. This one is a big one for me. I am really big on everybody grows together. So there is room for every one of you in this community. I cannot do everything on my own. I don't want to. It's enough just to manage a garden. So I want to work with as many farmers that want to work with me. And where do I want to take it? Well, when I was in my homestead dreaming phase, there was nowhere I could go to learn hands-on because it wasn't as popular as it is now. And so that's what I want to build. I want to build a place where you can bring your family, you can learn how to garden, you can learn how to can your food. You can just be in community with people who think like you think. So I want there to be a market overflowing with fresh produce. And I don't want that to just be my produce. I want that to be as many people that want to contribute. There will be a market where you can buy basically what you're buying out there, what everybody is working hard to make. And then on top of that, fellowship is a really big thing for me. So I want to have places where you can sit in the garden or just be outside and have some coffee and fellowship with a friend. I would love to host family reunions and get people back together because I think we've lost a sense of community. And I want to have a garden shop where those of you who might not want to start your own seeds can at least buy something to plant in your garden. I firmly believe that we all rise by lifting each other, and so that's why I want to work with everybody that wants to work with me. So I hope that you guys would follow me along in this journey, and I would love to help as many of you start your homestead. I'd love to hear all about your goals. So that's what we're going to do at this time. I think we've got about 20 minutes left. So I want to open it up to you, and I want to know, what do you want to know, and what are your goals, and how can I help you? So I'll go ahead and do that now.
What is CSA? What
CSA.
is the abbreviation for?
Good question. It stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And so it's just what it says. It's community helping the farmer. Good question. Anybody else? Yes?
What kind of livestock do you have on your farm?
So right now we have chickens and cattle and most recently ducks, because we saw them at Chick Days and couldn't help it. Anybody else?
How hard is it to, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
how hard is it for you and your experience to preserve the food? Because that seems to be our biggest problem, which we're like very novice and new at all this, but.
Okay.
Like growing the food is one thing, but then saving it and preserving it seems to be almost not worth it.
Yeah, it's exhausting. Anybody that has spent August canning can tell you it's tiring. But to me, it is so worth it. Because when I go down to our cellar and I get a jar of my home preserved food, the taste is unbeatable. And not only that, I know exactly what's in it. When you go to the store and you read the label, I can't even pronounce half of it. So I think it is worth it. Is it difficult? It can be, especially if you've never done it before. I was very fortunate to live in an area where I had a few people that were doing it and I could learn a little bit from them. So I would recommend, I mean, if you, where do you guys live?
Southwest Missouri.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm
so
just-
that'd be a little bit of a drive, but I'd even be willing to help y'all out with that. If you wanna give me a phone call or we can FaceTime or something, I can help you with that. But it's not super hard. There's tons of videos on YouTube I can point you towards as well. I would recommend, how much space do you have to store?
None right now.
None right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so canning might not be the best option for you, maybe dehydrating, or I know freeze dryers are a huge investment. We haven't made that investment yet because it is a big investment, but if you have the money, I highly recommend getting a freeze dryer. You can preserve food for 25 plus years and it takes up no space. So that's our next on our list, so I would recommend that. Or even freezing, we do a lot of freezing. In August, when the tomatoes are coming in, I can't keep up with them, I freeze them and I can them as I go. And it's actually a lot easier that way because the skins slip right off. So it's just, you know, as you kind of go through it, I've been doing it for 10 years and I'm still teaching myself ways to make it more efficient. But I recommend just getting started. If you don't feel comfortable with pressure canning, do a water bath and just get started, or a dehydrator. Yeah, no problem. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
So you're looking for networking?
Yes, yep, I wanna work with as many people that will.
So, in networking, are you gonna like put a running list together of, I don't know how you wanna network, or?
Yeah, so
Or something I need-
really just to be in community, you know, if I'm selling something and somebody says, hey, do you have raw milk? I don't produce raw milk, or I don't sell raw milk, but I know a farmer down the road that does, and I'd love to send you to them. So that kind of thing, helping support everybody by getting your name out as well. And then eventually, when I have that store that I showed, I wanna have, you know, if you wanna send me your products and sell in my store, I'd love to have them. So that's kind of what I mean by networking and getting everybody, like I said, I wanna help everybody rise to their fullest potential.
I'm still trying to figure out what my potential is.
Me too sometimes.
Because I grew up in the mountains,
Uh-huh.
and my family didn't have food a lot of times. So we ate my rabbits, and I butchered my rabbits. When I was 12, I butchered my first rabbit, because we didn't have anything to eat.
Yeah.
And so we've had to, I've been doing this a very long time. Everybody else says they've just started homesteading. I've been doing this since I was 12.
Yeah.
My mother, it was aghast. But,
Yeah.
but, so I don't know where I need to go, because it's more, that's what I do.
You know, you sound exactly like my husband. We have, you know, my husband is a farmer. He's not necessarily of the homesteading mindset. I make him confused sometimes as to how I think, and he's like, this is just the way we live. Like, doesn't everybody do this? No, not everybody does. But yeah, that's kind of where you have to figure out, do you want it to be a business, or do you want it to just be self-reliancy and being dependent on yourself and where you want to grow that? So just kind of depends on what your goal is. What is your goal, if I can ask?
I've got, I'm running 80 goats right now. And I've had them forever. Because when I moved to Missouri, I bought a few dairy goats, and those genetics I ended up selling over to a friend when I got out. Anyways, so the genetics that I've got now, I've had for 25 years or more.
Okay.
And my goats, which are different than other people's, I guess, they'll fatten up without you. I don't have to pour grain to them.
Mhm.
you know, they'll fatten out, and I don't know what step to take them to next, because I've already met my goals.
Yeah.
Of being able to do this, and this with them. So like I can milk them, you can raise meat out of them, they still just look like goats, but,
Yeah.
you know, I pour grain to them, I have this fat thing.
Yeah.
But,
Is that where rotational grazing would come in to help? Something like that?
Depends on your goal and your setup. If you wanna, first of all, rotational grazing also comes down to, are you physically able, and do your time constraints allow for that? But yeah, I'm obviously huge component of, rotational grazing. I really
I've
believe in the
done cows.
benefits. Yeah.
I've done cows on the rotational grazing, goats are a little harder, they're hard to keep in fences anyways.
Yeah, they
On a
rotate
good
on their
day.
own.
So, it's pretty hard to keep them, and I work, so I drive a school bus, so it's really hard to be up at 4 o'clock and not just, I just open up the door and go.
Yeah. Well, that brings up a good point. What is everybody's like hardest part of homesteading? What's the thing that you're struggling with that maybe I can help out with?
Time.
Yeah.
A lot of people burn out.
Burnout is huge.
They
I'm
do,
glad you said
because
that.
they get overwhelmed, they get the chickens and
That's me
realize
every
that
August. And then by December, I'm ready to go again.
Well, they get the, because I've seen it on Facebook, you know, they buy this little happy farm and they've still got the little job, but now they're trying to can and raise chickens and this and that, well, the dogs ate the chickens and the goats are in the neighbors, whatever, and
Yeah.
this and that, and they don't know how to deal with all that.
They didn't
because
understand fully getting
They
into
didn't
it.
understand it's a full-time job, it's an everyday,
Yeah.
you get up doing it, you go to bed doing it, and when the goats are out, and you're at work and this is going on, you have to go home and get the goat out of the
That's
fence.
why we
Yeah.
were late today. Our goats got out.
Of course they did, because you had somewhere to go. Well, that was exactly why I started the way that I did. I started with just gardening because I could manage, first of all, I was a single mother when I started all of this, so I could manage that on my own. And I would have never done any form of livestock on my own. I know people that do, and Lord bless them, but I just couldn't have done it. I couldn't have kept up. And I was working full time. So when I was working full time and I was working towards growing this to be where I could quit that job, there was a lot of nights I got 2 or 3 hours of sleep. So I think it just comes down to how bad do you want it and how many risks maybe are you willing to take? Are you willing to just quit that job and go for it? Or, you know, kind of what your circumstances are. Now, I knew how much I hated just sitting behind a computer in an office setting. I want to be outside. And that's the biggest thing for me. Annie, the one who put on this show for you guys today, she keeps asking me to join the farmer's market. I'm like, I don't want to go to the farmer's market, I want to be on the farm. So, you know, it just comes down to how hard you are able to work towards it, how many hours a week you're able to put to it. And I just encourage everybody to start somewhere, but start small. Don't jump in head first and get cows and goats and sheep and chickens and not know how to take care of any of them. That's what I would recommend. Yes, ma'am.
And I don't have any of this, but the
Sure.
one thing that I notice, and that I think people need to think about and remember, is that if in your past life, you had a job where you got a 2-week vacation, and you thought you were gonna go to France.
I know where you're going with this.
Okay, and that you cannot do that unless you have developed, and that's part of your community goal, I think, should be.
Yes.
To help each other, because maybe, I mean, people need a vacation, okay? But if you can't leave because you don't know anybody who can come and take care of your goats or knows how to handle your rooster that wants to spur the person who's trying to collect the eggs,
Yeah.
you know, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, goes, you know, feeds into the burnout. And so
Absolutely.
that starting small is wise, but also this whole idea of building community is very smart, because even if people might have to travel a little distance to take care of somebody else's farm, they're gonna come over and help you when it's your turn.
Absolutely.
To take a break.
Yeah, that's
And-
And it's
critical.
good too. We had a friend that, she went away for a week and she said, hey, can you come look my cows anymore? She had one, I think she was milking at the time. And I said, sure. It was beautiful, it was nice and quiet, nice peaceful, and I always wanted to have a dairy cow. He said, no, I want to have a dairy cow. And I wanted one, so I said, I'll be glad to do it. So at the end of the week, I was like, we're not getting it.
And that's another thing, that's a really good point. So that's also why I wanna offer these internship experiences. Come out and I'll show you. And if at the end of the day you're still excited, maybe it is for you. But if halfway through the day you're asking when lunch is, probably not the best thing for you. So that's, part of that community is definitely having those people to rely on, because it's a hard life. It is very rewarding, very fulfilling, but it's hard, and it takes an everyday commitment. And if you can't make that commitment, at least to like gardening or livestock, then I recommend looking into some other aspects of homesteading. Homesteading doesn't mean you have to live on a farm. It doesn't mean you have to have a big garden or have livestock. It's really just a mindset of being more self-reliant, being within your community, supporting those around you. If you don't want to raise goats, I understand why. Go to your neighbor and use her as a resource. But I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind is you don't have to do everything. You really don't. But if you can build that community and your neighbor down the road has milk, you have eggs, up the street there's a garden. I mean, that's what it's all about, and building that sense of community, because for 2 years there we kind of lost all sense of community. And I think it's really important that we bring it back before we don't have it at all.
Or support a CSA.
Yeah.
Buy your produce or what produce you can from a local, because that helps you
Yeah.
to expand.
And a lot of people, if you can't afford a CSA membership, talk to the farmer. A lot of times they'll take your labor. They will take your labor. So if you want that produce but can't afford it, that's another option. Yes, ma'am.
So that's kind of aiming towards my question too. Part of the CSA, I watched your YouTube video on your CSA plan and everything. I don't know, on the video you said you prefer people to come out to the farm so they can actually see where their food is grown and everything.
Yeah.
But part of that, is that something that you could do where you add like, you come out to pick up your box, but you could also spend an hour helping to pick tomatoes or
Absolutely.
something like that?
Absolutely. I would love that. And if you're interested in it and you want to know, how are you harvesting your stuff? How are you growing? Because I grow cut flowers as well. If you want to know, if you want to even just get interested in cut flowers and know the different varieties or how to harvest them or how to arrange a bouquet, I love that. If you want to come out and spend some time with me, I will have you.
I just didn't know if that was part of something you offer like with the CSA, or if it's gonna be more like that internship.
Nope. Right now, actually, I'm not offering specific internships, but if you want to come out and you want to learn, I'm happy to teach.
I'm gonna interject with her questions. Right now, Brittney and I are, I'd say we're mentoring a young man.
Yes.
He's our neighbor, and his family is, he's been going with me to do feeding chores since he was 8, because he's very much like her. He grew up in Blue Springs, in the city, and that boy is not like any of his other 3 brothers. He wants to be outside so desperately. His other brothers don't.
Yeah.
So he would take his Saturdays, he'd go with me to do feeding just to do that. But now I'm seeing, I think sometimes he loves her more than I love her. But he comes over, and this fall, he was in the garden, and he's like, well, what do you do with all of this stuff? He didn't even, they live in the country now, but he didn't even realize, you eat squash.
He didn't realize where his food came from,
Yeah, he
and that's a
didn't realize
huge
where
problem.
it came from, and now, this, last Sunday, he was helping us out there in the garden as we were starting to prepare stuff in the middle of a
In a windstorm.
Yeah. And it's just like that, it's not an internship, but mentor. If you had had somebody mentor you as a kid.
Oh, I would have loved it. Caitlin, she actually was in FFA with me. We had nothing.
No.
Our town had nothing. We were just left to our own devices. Thankfully, we were blessed with an ag advisor who truly cared about us. And if it weren't for him, I don't know if I'd be here today. So, yeah, I mean, I would love to be that person for anybody. Even if it's just one person, then that makes all of this worth it to me. But I would love to do that for everybody. I did, when I first started this, I often got met with, you're not gonna feed the world with that type of living. And I thought about that, and I thought about it, and I tried to come up with an answer. Yes, I can, yes, I can, yes, I can. I don't care about feeding the world. I wanna feed my community. My community is who I see on the day-to-day, who I truly care about. So not that I don't care about the rest of the world, but that's not my responsibility. My community is my responsibility, and I'm gonna do what I can to support that. Anybody else? Or anybody wanna share some of their homesteading goals, or what got them started with homesteading?
Getting below a 14-hour workday would be awesome.
I've not gotten there, so I don't know when that happens. In fact, what time was it when you finally got in yesterday? Almost 9? And that's a good day. Wait until planting and harvest.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's different. I would say an 8-hour workday at an office, I was so mentally drained, and I like people in certain settings, office settings, I not like them so much. So by the time I got home, I was so just done that I could sit on the couch and vegetate for hours, and I did until I got into gardening. And so I think the more we can get people into really living, sitting behind a computer is not living. It's just not. Being outside, getting your hands in the soil, working, living a life that God created you to live. I mean, that is what it's all about. And so I think the more people we can get to do that, I think depression rates are gonna go down, illness rates are gonna go down. I think it is so critical. And so that's why I'm so vocal about what I'm doing. And I deal with a lot of pushback from people who don't understand, but it's not my job to get them to understand today. Maybe someday they will. God will get them there, but my job is to do what God called me to do, and that's to spread this homesteading journey and let people know that there's more to life than what the majority are doing.
It's not really work if you love what you do.
Exactly.
I love being a nurse, but it's still a job, I have to leave my home.
That's me.
We want a homestead to be something. I don't know what they're gonna be putting in food, it's gonna get worse. But we're from an hour and a half away, southeast of here.
Okay.
And, we have that great old Ozark rock.
Yeah. Raised beds. Yeah.
We're getting there, but I'll tell you, working that soil is.
That's the work you guys should get older anyway.
Yeah.
Might as well just do it now.
Yeah, that rock is definitely difficult, but raised beds, I started with raised beds. I don't use it now because honestly it's more cost effective for me to grow in the ground because the ground that we have is good ground. But if you don't have good ground, there's raised beds, there's aquaponics, hydroponics, there's all kinds of ways around that. Or if you don't want to grow that, goats don't care if it's rocky ground. Maybe goats are for you. Maybe chickens are for you.
Yeah, we have those.
Yeah, yeah, they got out on you. But it's all about doing what you can with what you have. Like I said, I started, one of the years I was homesteading, I had an apartment and I grew in 5-gallon Home Depot buckets on my balcony. I was so obsessed I wasn't gonna let it stop me. And now my plants are taking over the house, and every day my husband looks at me and he was like, I don't understand, but she's happy, so we're gonna do it.
Yeah.
All right, well, we've got about 4 minutes left if anybody else has any other questions. Yes?
Do you keep your seeds year to year, or do you get new ones every year?
Both. So I consider myself a fairly novice seed saver. In fact, I don't consider myself an expert in anything. I've been doing this for 10 years, but it takes that, and I don't think you ever stop learning. But I started seed saving about 2 years ago, and so I'll save seeds, but I don't trust myself enough, then I'll buy seeds too. So for my CSA, I always buy seeds just to make sure I can assure I have what I need, and then I save some and plant it, and if it grows, cool. If not, oh well. That's a good question. Anybody else?
What is a pressure canner, what brand of pressure canner would you recommend for those who are starting out with pressure canning?
Starting out, get yourself a Presto. They're like $129. You can get a 16-quart pressure canner with that. That's what I started on. It's very, very easy to use. I have now graduated to like 5 All-American canners, and I have them all going at once. But yeah, I start out with what you can afford. If you can afford the investment in an All-American, I highly recommend it. I love mine. It doesn't have the gasket that the pressure canners that Presto puts out does. So you do have to learn a little bit about oiling the edge to get a good seal, but it's definitely worth it, and there's a ton of YouTube videos out there on the differences of them. So if you're maybe a little scared of pressure canning like a lot of people are, I would go the Presto route because you kind of can't mess it up, but maybe graduate to the All-American. Yes, ma'am.
I'll comment on her pressure canner too. Presto now makes an electric one, so like if you're scared of the old-fashioned ones, the stovetop ones, they make one, it kind of looks like an Instapot, but it's bigger and actually rated for pressure canning. It's definitely more expensive, but it's a set it and forget it type thing. If you're.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I would say you have to get one, because I'm scared of the stovetop ones at this point, but everything that I've watched, really get like 7 full stars in it, I think. But especially for first time, if you're scared of that stovetop, because growing up, I always had the stories, you know, always blew up on Granny's stove, that kind of thing.
Yeah. The newer ones, though, I will say they put in so many different safety precautions on them that I really don't see that happening with the newer ones. But that's a good point. I have not had any experience with the electric ones, but I've heard of a lot of people that have had good success with them.
What's the difference in, I mean, I know the difference of pressure canning and water bath, but the pressure canning, is it that much quicker?
No, so it's not really a matter of preference, it's a matter of acidity level. So you can't, like with your jams and jellies, you can water bath them and it's fine. If you were to take green beans, it's a low acid, and you were to water bath that, you would not be able to store them on your shelf long term. They're not considered shelf stable at that point, and you run a risk of things like botulism and different foodborne illnesses that way. They don't stay. So for those low acid, you have to use the pressure canner. So good to know if you're getting ready to do some food preservation. And if you buy the ball canning book, I highly recommend that one. It's basically a comprehensive guide to everything. It tells you step by step for every single thing you would need to preserve and how to do it. Any other last minute? Okay, well, thank you guys so much for listening. If you had a question but were maybe too shy to ask, I do have a booth out here. Feel free to swing by and grab a business card for my contact info as well. Thank you guys.
You know Dakota Gibson?
Yeah.
He would have been freshman year at the bank. Well, I don't have a picture of him back in the day.
Did you say Dakota Gibson? Is it really? Okay, I remember him.
Yeah, he's the same.
Yeah.
Cows, pigs, chickens, gardens. Yeah.
He was Blue Springs though, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we were south, but of course it's all one chapter.
It's all one chapter, yeah. He was, and he still talks about the FFA and theater all the time. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't have that. I graduated in 04.
Yeah.
So I didn't have
Did you go
that.
to South or North? I was just saying, well, you probably know my sister who goes to South. She graduated in 05.
Oh, okay. I didn't know she was that older than you.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the same. He lives down around here. Half mile from my house. We're in the Holdens.
Okay, cool.
But I graduated from Brittney. Small world.
Yeah, no,
Yeah. All the people whose brains ended up out here, right?
yeah, and it's funny how we all ended up wanting to do something in agriculture.
Yep.
Yeah, and living in Blue Springs.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I was just looking for your
I have them over at my booth, so I don't have my business cards in here. I didn't grab them. But come see me out there and I'll get you one.
I got it back to mine.
Did you get one?
No,
I still that's why Kyle left. He went to like jail. That's great. Oh, okay. I don't know what he's doing. He went to go get something good. We had Chinese. I don't know if we'll have again on that. Well, really what it was is I finished putting everything loaded into the car. And he was in town picking stuff up, and I was like, would you mind getting Chinese? And he's like, I'll turn around. Thank you. Would appreciate it. Yes. Alright. I can tell you're really nervous. Yeah, once I get into it a little more, I just decided to just that was what was before. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. I got it. No, I'm serious. No, you can still do it. Thank you.
I heard you get nervous.
Yeah. Well, once I got rid of my I know that's what I told her. I said, I thought you were nervous at the beginning and then she was kind of nervous. Yeah, it's like, I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know.
Nope.